Welcome to Not Your Ordinary Parts, a podcast where we talk about hard things associated with the human experience with the goal of increasing awareness, growth, and healing. You may hear information from professionally licensed therapists, life coaches, healers, doctors, etc. This information is not medical advice or therapy and is not meant to replace actual therapy or instructions given by a doctor or personal therapist. I'm your host, Jalon Johnson. My guest today is Elizabeth Scott. Elizabeth is a licensed therapist, intuitive guide, and the founder of HeartSight Healing, where she brings together the science of psychology and the very soul of healing. Elizabeth is board certified by the National Board of Certified Counselors, holds an MS in clinical community counseling and a BA in English. But her real credentials live in the way she listens, with presence and reverence. With deep roots in internal family systems therapy, enhanced by a complementary practice like energy healing, astrology, somatic attunement, and nature-based therapy, Elizabeth's work bridges the clinical and the sacred, offering a unique integrative approach that blends evidence-based modalities with soul-centered practices. For more than 15 years, Elizabeth has walked alongside those navigating trauma, burnout, grief, and inner disconnection, and not as a fixer or an expert, but as a compassionate guide who helps people remember the truth of who they are beneath the survival patterns. Elizabeth helps her clients create inner safety, transform their relationship with painful parts, and reconnect with the wisdom that has always lived within them, always honoring the whole human being. At the heart of Elizabeth's work is the guiding belief that we don't need to be fixed, we need to be remembered. And her mission is clear: to help people come home to themselves, not just in theory, but in felt, lasting ways. In a culture that often asks us to override, fragment, and bypass, Elizabeth offers a different path, one that says your sensitivity is not a flaw, your story is not too much, and your healing doesn't have to look like anyone else's. Her work is a constant and gentle reminder that emotional safety isn't something we earn, it's something we learn to allow. And when we stop fighting ourselves and start listening within, we begin to remember what has always been true, that we are already whole, already wise, and already home. So, Elizabeth, welcome to the show, and thank you so much for being my guest.
Thank you, Jalon. That was beautiful. There's a part of me that's like, she sounds great, whoever that is.
She is. I stumbled
Yeah.
my way through it, but
No, that was
we made
thank you
it.
thank you. Yeah, that's a really beautiful, special way to be introduced. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You're so very welcome. And also, I gave a brief introduction, but so that the audience can get to know you a little bit better, would you mind giving us a little bit of background about yourself and how you got to who and where you are today, please?
Yeah, sure. So, um, my name is Elizabeth, and I'm an IFS therapist. I am a Reiki master practitioner. I do astrology. Um, I also like long walks on the beach and golden retriever. um, but yeah, some more things about me. My Myers-Briggs for many years was ENFJ, and then I just recently took it again, and I was an INFP, and it really like rocked my world. It was crazy to have that shift. I am a highly sensitive person, or an HSP. I am a Pisces sun, Taurus moon, Libra rising, but we'll get into that. Um, I am a wife and a sister and a daughter and an aunt, and I am a dog mom to my golden retriever, Isla, who is my daily companion as I work from home with her next to me all of the time. Um, and yeah, I'm in Maryland, right outside of Baltimore, and I practice from my home office here. And in addition to spending years training as a therapist and practicing as a therapist, I've also spent almost 20 years kind of in my own healing experience, doing therapy, doing lots of different kinds of therapy, and lots of different kinds of healing in other ways too. So everything from astrology to Reiki to shamanic healing, to different kinds of energy work. And, I've done that because I'm very curious and I want to know what it's like and I want to know how it feels and I want to know how it works and how it helps. But also because for me, when I'm working with people, I want to be coming from my own sense of wholeness as much as possible. And I can only take people as far as I've gone myself. So it feels really important to me to just kind of go as deep as I can go, in my own healing and self exploration. So all those things have kind of brought me to where I am today.
Thanks for sharing that. And I love that quote, like, you can only go as deep, you can only take somebody as deep as you've gone yourself. And it's so true. It really is. And when we were talking earlier, you said that, and I was just like, man, that is so profound.
Yeah. It's, like when you're working with your parts, if you can be with your part that is holding shame, or your part that goes blank, or your part that gets angry and lashes out, then you can be with those parts in other people too, because you've already done it. And you know that those parts are kind of more than who they are as they initially show up. And um, yeah, just the transformation that can happen in befriending those parts and learning what they might be protecting.
Mm, beautifully said. Thank you for sharing all that. And you said a lot of things that I have no idea what you were talking about, but we'll get into that.
I know. We'll get
and
there. Yeah.
And that was one of the main reasons why I was so excited about this conversation, because we're talking about a lot of things that may be taboo for people, or that people don't understand, or that people just shy away from. And I don't want to do that. So I'm really excited to have this conversation. And before we get into all of that, like, I do want to talk about you a little bit more. How long have you been a therapist now? And you said in the past that there was, I guess, a part of you that always knew you wanted to be a therapist.
Yeah. So I was just thinking about this today. It's been almost 18 years since I first went to grad school to become a therapist, um, which is crazy because 1995 was only like 15 years ago. So that doesn't make any sense. Um, yeah. So I, um, I have always kind of had this sense, I remember, it's funny, I remember being little and, you could wish what your superpower would be. And I always wish that I could read people's minds. And I feel like that's a very burgeoning therapist kind of superpower wish. But yeah, as I got older, I was always the friend that people would talk to. And um, also, I think my love of reading and stories, people's stories, always love people's stories and kind of noticing the themes and noticing kind of what's coming up. Um, and so it was something that I was always interested in. I wasn't sure for a time that I would go to grad school. And after I graduated from college, initially I started working in higher ed admissions. And that was a really good first job experience because it was kind of like cross training because you're doing presentations and you're managing relationships and you do some travel and you're learning. There are just so many things that you do as you're in that role. And then I got another job that kind of thought would be about writing and creating, because that's another interest of mine. And it ended up really not being that, and actually being a pretty bad fit for me. And the environment was very, very stressful. And that was one of the first times I ever went to a therapist myself because I was feeling really depressed and anxious and kind of panicking Sunday night before having to go to work. And it was during that time that I realized, to do what I really want to do and to do what I really feel called to do, I am going to need to go back to grad school. So
Mm.
that was a really clarifying time. My therapist at the time actually told me, you need to get out of that job, which was very specific advice, which I don't often give as a therapist and isn't often a part of therapy, but I was actually very grateful to her that she said that, because it was validating, and it kind of gave me permission to recognize what a not good fit that was for me. But once I kind of just made the decision, yeah, I'm open to go to grad school, this was the only thing. This was the only thing I wanted to do. So it was really clear.
I think being so young and having, the desire to have that superpower to read people's minds, it kind of put you on track to where you would be. And also I feel like that's kind of a burden at the same time. Did it ever feel like, you know, wanting to help people even from such a young age was something that felt heavy?
Hmm. That's a good question. You know, this is not directly answering your question, but I will say that I'm glad that superpower does not exist, because that would be really stressful.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, I mean, wanting to help and wanting to connect has always been in my nature. And when it could become a burden is when it feels like that's the way that's the way you relate, that's of value, or like that's the only thing about you, or something, where you're focusing on the other and kind of less aware of your own experience. That's where that could be hard, or that could kind of shift into being out of balance.
Where do you think that idea came from?
Hmm.
Because something you mentioned, wanting to be the helper can sometimes be a way of, I guess, not sitting with yourself or avoiding our own whatever it is that we need to unravel. And for you to feel like that at such a young age, I can't think that it would come from that, but also I'm not really sure. So, I mean, I'm curious to know where do you think that came from, especially so young?
Yeah. Well, so when I was really young, I have always been very, very sensitive. Again, highly sensitive person. So, there can be kind of sensory overload, and being so attuned to really subtle cues in the environment. And things would kind of land as a shock to my system. And so I was very tuned in. And, I grew up in a home with very loving parents, and also my brother, who is also a wonderful person. And they were very supportive of my creativity and my imagination and my development. Um, and also, you know, there's a lot of intellectual focus. There's a lot of focus on kind of intellectual growth and development. And I don't think there maybe weren't as many ways of like naming some of the very deep feelings that I had. And so I wasn't always clear what I was feeling. And so it would then kind of feel like anxiety or something like that inside of me. And so, because I wasn't exactly sure how to kind of be with some of these big feelings, if I could be helpful or focus on the other person, that kind of helped me in that way.
Hmm. That makes a lot of
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah.
Do you think at some point that you kind of felt responsible for managing others' emotions or having to like read the room and kind of keep things smooth as a way of avoiding what felt like anxiety?
So, certainly not consciously, but what I'll say is I wanted to be good, you know. I wanted to be a good kid and um and not get in trouble. And
Sure.
for us growing up in that time, getting in trouble was like getting sent to timeout. And that was kind of like the gentle parenting back
Yeah.
then. Um but I think for me, when I was sent to timeout, it kind of felt like this behavior or this part of you, when it shows up, you lose connection. And so if I want to stay in connection, then maybe I need to hide this part of me or keep this part of me at bay. And maybe even there's something wrong with or bad about this part of me if when it shows up it's causing me to kind of lose connection. And so then yeah, maybe other parts could feel responsible to be showing up in a way to make sure that wouldn't happen.
Mm. I want to address something and then also honor it, and then kind of, if I can, blend our two worlds, because timeout is something I've only ever heard about like in magazines.
Yeah. Yeah.
We would laugh at timeout because we would be like, what is that? But
Yeah.
hearing you talk about it now, it's like, oh, wow. Well, if it made you feel like you couldn't be you, then that was a form of punishment that was traumatic because it made you separate or have to disconnect from your authentic self. And I think that leads perfectly into my next question, because I was going to ask you, what was it like for you in your early um, environment, like school, family, friends? And like when you look back now, do you feel like you had to be someone other than authentic Elizabeth?
Yeah. Yeah. So we can go into that. Yeah, and thank you for what you said. And it is kind of like, and again, honoring my parents for doing the best that they could with what they knew, and the
Absolutely.
way they responded to me was very different than the way the parents and the generation before them responded to them, like when they were being parented in the 1950s and 60s, And so, yeah, holding all of that. But yeah, I mean, growing up, um like I said, my parents, my brother, we grew up moving around. I was born in Nashville and then lived outside of Charleston in a small town called Moncks Corner, South Carolina. And then we moved to Atlanta, and then we moved to a smaller town in North Carolina when I was halfway through high school. My dad was a minister, so we moved quite a bit. And yeah, I mean, I spent a lot of time outside playing, like climbing trees and catching snakes and catching frogs. And we we were in South Carolina for Hurricane Hugo, which was one of the really big ones. And we had uprooted trees in our backyard, and I would play like witch's brew in the crater underneath the tree that was filled with water, and playing with neighborhood kids and going into abandoned fields. And it was great. I read a lot, big reader. My parents read to us a lot. Um, and again, very sensitive. Um, and, you know, I also, I was not athletic. It felt like a lot of, the cool kids were athletic and they could do things like have hand-eye coordination, which I could not do. That was not my forte. And so that would, along with my kind of sensitivity and feeling really deeply and being very intuitive, just kind of feeling very physically awkward. And that was something that other parts of me maybe tried to compensate for so I could connect, or I don't feel like a part of the other kids. I was good at school and I was a big reader, but felt kind of different in some of those other ways. Um, but yeah, I think, there's time out that was hard for parts of me. And, from an IFS perspective, when you think about like your exiles, the parts of you that are sort of not allowed into your awareness. And I think parts of me being exiled, or yeah, feeling exiled and then doing that for myself to prevent that from happening again. Um, you know, and then school, yeah, I wanted to please my teachers. And then, you know, I I had good relationships with most of my teachers, but there were some experiences at school where I felt really misunderstood and really shamed. And those things really impacted my sense of self too. Like, there was this teacher when I was maybe 9. He's a math teacher, and I was in math class, and um, I had finished my work, and so I was drawing a picture because I had finished and I was waiting for the other kids to finish, and I was drawing a picture of uh, this woman, kind of like a Barbie like looking woman. So I drew her silhouette, and she was wearing kind of I don't know if you've seen like the classic 1950s Barbie with like the black strapless dress.
Mm.
So yeah, I was kind of drawing that, and I was like, I'm going to add sparkles to her dress. So I started adding these little sparkles, and the math teacher came up behind me and he was like, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "Oh, I'm just drawing this picture." And he was like, "Come out into the hall with me." And so I went out into the hall, and he was like, "Explain this picture to me." And I was like, "This, well, it's a woman wearing a sparkly dress." And he was like, "Well, what about this?" And he was kind of indicating to the picture. And I realized, I don't know if he said it or how he said it, I can't quite remember. But basically, he thought he saw the sparkles and like the placement of the sparkles. And he thought I was drawing a woman wearing a sheer dress and like drawing
Mm.
a picture of her body. And I just felt this hot flood of shame, you know, for how he was seeing that. And he was so stern with me. And I'm out in the hall alone with this man, like accusing me of drawing this picture. And there's no curiosity. And then he pulled my main teacher out into the hall too. And he explained to her what had happened, like his understanding of what had happened. And they were both like, "Well, we're not going to tell your parents about this, but you better not do this again." And I felt so misunderstood. I felt so ashamed that he could see something like that in this picture that had come from me, you know? And I never told my parents about it. Um, and that was the first time that I remember kind of dissociating because it felt so shaming. And I didn't even see it coming. So it was almost like I could just be doing something. I could just be kind of being myself in some way, and I could still get blasted for it. So, yeah, I'm going to really pay attention. I'm going to really scan and make sure I'm doing everything right and make sure I'm pleasing you, because I am not feeling that again. I didn't even see that coming.
Yeah, I think at that point you develop a hypervigilance and it's no longer safe to just be, you
Yeah.
know? And
Yeah.
like you said, the constant scanning, that has to keep your nervous system on 10.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So, you know, I could be really good at being really, really good.
Mm,
And it was really important. Um,
right.
yeah.
Thank you for
So,
sharing that. I'm sorry that that happened. And,
yeah.
a person's perception is their reality. So if he thought it was something different, you had to go by, his perception of it because he was in a position of authority.
Right.
And you just doing something as simple as drawing because you finished your math work early. Like, how did that lead to you being shamed, you know?
Yeah. Exactly. It was such a shock to my system. It just felt like it came out of the blue. And it also kind of felt like, was there something like bad in me that I don't know about that he's seeing or
Mm,
something like that? Like, is it something about me? But um yeah, and I mean, it would be hard to imagine um today, like that playing out in that way, or you know a teacher not, if they had a concern, you know I think there's more awareness of like, tell me about this, and you
right.
know are you okay, or I don't know, like having
Asking
that
questions instead of drawing conclusions.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. But yeah, so that, that was really impactful. And I did have more anxiety around school and teachers after that, even though I was, academically doing well. Um, but I think another layer too, being a minister's daughter and just having a sense of everybody being aware of you and everybody kind
Mm,
of knowing who you are and being interested in what you're doing and your behavior, and in some ways that's really supportive, like having a community that's there for you and that cares about you, and at the same time just feeling like I am being watched, um, and that was never explicitly said to me, like, Elizabeth, everybody's watching you, so you need to be good. Like, my parents never said that. That was never like something that was a directive, but it just was something that I felt. And so
sure.
I also could be really good at talking to adults in those settings and kind of meeting them where they were. And, being able to do that served me really well. And also, there's this there's this part of me that could just be really polished, and sometimes that one still comes up, and um again, really useful part, and it when it comes up in certain situations where I want to just be really open, it kind of stands in front of that. And so then there's another part of me that wants to just like tie her up and put her in the closet so that I can just be I can just be comfortable being genuine. But yeah.
Yeah, I can see the internal struggle that you could have there because being a minister's daughter, I mean, you almost have to live up to a certain standard because you couldn't be like the other kids because your father is someone who is highly respected in the community, and you know if you do something wrong it reflects on him, and then it could disparage the family's name, and so it's a lot of pressure. It's a lot of
Yeah.
pressure.
Yeah. And you're just aware that people are watching and people are reacting. People are reacting to what your family does. People are reacting to what kind of car your family drives. Like, is it nice enough? Is it too nice? Like you,
Mm.
and everybody has a different reaction. So
Right.
you can't get it right with everybody, you know?
Yeah, that's so true.
Um,
And if you try and
and
please everybody, the one person that gets ignored is yourself,
yeah, yeah,
which we see that a lot, you know. So thank you
yeah,
for sharing your stories.
yeah,
It it really does show that just because someone is a therapist or a healer, it doesn't mean that they didn't have their own struggles. And also, I think, as we mentioned before, because you've had your own struggles, it allows you to do and be more for others.
yeah. Thank you. Thank you for creating the space for me to share. And it's so true. It's like, these really young, sensitive parts that were feeling hurt and holding pain. Um, just knowing deeply how that felt is a huge part of wanting to be present for other people and their pain, and also knowing that it can be healed
Hmm.
and you don't have to keep holding that forever.
Sure.
Yeah.
That's a very good point. Thank you for mentioning that. Something I want to circle back to is you mentioned you're a highly sensitive person. Um, what is that in case someone isn't aware of what it means to be highly sensitive, or they are and just have never connected the dots?
Yeah. So, highly sensitive person is a specific um, neurotype. Um, so it's technically a kind of neurodivergence, um, but I think it's something like 15 to 20% of the population might be a highly sensitive person, because there are kind of genetic differences in HSPs. But it basically means that you are really tuned in and are able to pick up really subtle cues in the environment. And you also may have higher levels of sensory sensitivity. So, like, fluorescent lights feel like um, a brutal attack,
Mm,
or certain textures can be overstimulating, or certain smells, or you might find yourself feeling overstimulated in large crowds, or things like that. Um, it's also a neurotype that tends to have a huge amount of empathy because, um, it's been said that there may be more mirror neurons if you're an HSP. So, like, you can maybe feel other people's feelings even more, and things like that. So, you're just picking up on a lot in the environment that um, maybe not everybody else is picking up on.
and so, for someone who has been a highly sensitive person and no one else was aware of what was going on, maybe they were overstimulated, or even there's a type of neurodivergence, like you mentioned, you might get scolded for being overstimulated, which then could lead to you feeling even more like out of place.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like, you could, um, I don't know, you could be freaking out about something because it's just too much. And the people around you might not understand that. Or again, if you're just looking at behavior, it's like, how do we correct this behavior, rather than understanding, actually,
Yes.
this child is just very overstimulated. So,
Mm,
yeah.
yeah. I'm so glad I circled back to that because I think it's important for people to be understood and honored in their experiences of being sensitive and not being recognized, or being told, "Oh, you're just overreacting," or "You have
Yeah.
emotional problems," or "Get it together," or something like that, which can be so invalidating.
Yeah, that's right. I totally agree. And our world is not set up for HSPs or sensitivity, just in general. Our world is not really set up to be super supportive of that. We're kind of conditioned. push through and get it done and, um, you know, show up and be outgoing and, um, not that you can't be outgoing if you're an HSP, but it is a really there's a lot of external focus and kind of responding to what's on the outside rather than slowing down and noticing what's happening on the inside and honoring that and supporting that. And so, yeah, there is actually a quiz that you can take online to see if you're an HSP. But also, there's so many kinds of sensitivity, and whatever kind of sensitivity you have is such a gift
Mm.
because, yeah, it's such a strength in connecting and in sensing into things that maybe we can't see in a tangible way. And, um, caring deeply about other people, about the environment, the world, and feeling things that maybe the the larger crowd isn't tuning into so that it can be noticed that it's there and so that it can be responded to. So it's like
Yeah.
the canaries in the coal mine, you know? Yeah.
I really like that you labeled it as a gift because, it could be seen as a burden or as a part that people wish they didn't have. But when you really hone in on it, the way we're doing and acknowledging it is a gift. And just because other people, maybe the collective, don't understand it or can't feel or respond to things the same way you do, doesn't mean that you should be an outcast. You're different in a special way.
Right. Exactly. And yeah, I mean, there like systems and structures are not celebrating sensitivity, like you can't be productive if you're going to be sensitive about that. It doesn't like serve capitalism to be a sensitive being who is trying to honor the rhythms of your body or your emotions or feeling into this doesn't feel aligned, maybe I won't do that anymore, maybe we shouldn't do that anymore. um, so yeah, it's not super supported by the systems, and that does not mean it's not a good thing.
1,000%.
Yeah.
Um, when you picture little Elizabeth, that 7-year-old who maybe felt too sensitive or awkward and different, but so attuned, what do you think that she understood about the world that went unspoken and that others missed?
Mm, yeah. You know, she was always really confused by any kind of harshness. Um, like that just didn't make sense to her. Um, she felt so connected, and so she was kind of like, if we're connected, why are you reacting to me this way? Or like, if there's love here, why are you reacting to me this way? It doesn't make sense. Um, but yeah, she really tuned into so much. She really tuned into the undercurrents of things. Like there might be a time when, for example, um, my my parents didn't argue very much, and they really didn't in front of us. And I might overhear them speaking to each other in a more charged way, and I would be like, "Mom, um, are you and Dad fighting? Are you and Dad arguing?" She'd be like, "No, we're not arguing. We're just disagreeing." And of course, for her, she's trying to not freak me out. She wants me to feel comfortable that things are okay between them. But to little Elizabeth, it was kind of like, if, oh, there's something here that I'm feeling, but it's not matching up to what's being said. And also, if what I'm feeling isn't being said, maybe whatever it is like really scary, or um, would be really bad if that were happening. So, yeah, just kind of tuning into the undercurrents and not quite knowing for sure, but feeling what was happening. Um, and then I remember just reflecting on other things that kind of didn't make sense. Like I remember being in elementary school, and I was always really interested in mythology from other cultures. And I had a book about Greek mythology and a book about Norse mythology. And I remember studying um, the history of the Egyptians and their gods and goddesses. And it was all so interesting to me. And I remember thinking, like, they really believed in their gods and in their religion. Like, they thought that was so real. And we think that ours is so real and they're wrong. And like, we think they're wrong. And so, how do we know that we're not like them? To where looking back, we think, oh, isn't that funny that they had these gods and goddesses as a part of their culture? And this is what it really, it just, yeah, I was always so curious about that. Like, how do we know that we're the ones who are right? Um, and if we're the ones that are right, and that means other people are wrong, and they might be in trouble because they're wrong. um, I don't know. That doesn't make sense to me. So, yeah, always had questions about that.
This was elementary school?
Yeah,
Like, what grade?
like fifth grade.
Oh, okay. I was gonna say if this was like first or second grade,
Yeah,
like my goodness.
yeah, fifth grade.
No, but you make some valid points because who determines who's right and who's wrong? And why can't you ask questions about that?
Mm,
So,
yeah,
to be that attuned to those things at such a young age, like you were really, I think, on track to be the person who you are now.
thank you for saying that. Yeah, always been very curious. And I did ask my parents those questions, um and they would just say, God loves everyone.
Right. Yeah.
So,
The blanket coverall.
yeah. Yeah, they would say God is love. But
Mm.
yeah, it was very curious to me.
If you had an opportunity now to sit with little Elizabeth, what do you think she would want you to know, and what would you want her to know now?
Mm, okay. So, yeah, I'm just kind of inviting her to be here. And I'm so glad I have been able to sit with her many times. And yeah, she just wants me to know her. She wants me to know who she really is. She wants to be seen kind of for all the parts of her, and for that to be okay. And not only okay, but to be just really celebrated and loved
Mm.
for all of these parts of her. And I want her to know that I see her, and I see her curiosity and her creativity and her knowing, her intuition and her knowing of so much more than she is sometimes consciously aware of. Yeah, and just feel so much love towards her, just so much warmth. Yeah.
Mhm. Thank you for sharing that. And I'm glad that you are able to visit with her and let her know that she's welcomed and that her sensitivities were a gift and that the dumb teacher didn't know what he was talking about. Oh man.
Yeah.
Um
We've
yeah,
we've done lots of redos with that guy. So
good, good.
yeah.
I'm glad. You said that early on in your career, you did some community work in Baltimore, supporting folks who didn't always have access to care and sitting with stories that most people look away from. I'm curious, do you feel like little Elizabeth and your early life experiences helped shape how you showed up in this community work? And were there any specific experiences that maybe widened your lens on what people carry?
Yeah. Um that's such a great question. Yeah, little Elizabeth, just the way she felt and the way she was tuned into things and the way things landed on her um, certainly informed, you know, my intention to just be really open and empathic with the people that I was sitting with. And it felt really easy. It felt really easy for me to just be kind of heart led with people. Like that was sort of the way therapy flowed to me, just kind of from the beginning. It's just going with the person. Um, I actually remember in my in my practicum before my internship, um, one of my professors who was a CBT therapist, a very skilled CBT therapist, was asking me to do a practice round. And after I did that, he was like, "Oh my God, are you humanistic?" He was like in a really horrified tone of voice. Um, and yeah. I mean, I'm just gonna flow with you and just meet you where you are and accept where you are. But yeah, so I worked in a university or a college counseling center for young women, and many of the young women that we worked with were from Baltimore City. Many of them, the first in their families to go to college. It was their first time ever encountering therapy. And we did psychodynamic work. So it was all about understanding what in the past influences what you're currently experiencing and interpersonal. So it was about the relationship. And our counseling center didn't have session limits. And so I would get to see the students I was seeing for the whole year if they wanted to keep coming back. And then they would come back to me the next year. And so some of them I
Mhm.
saw for the whole 4 years, and I got to see the arc of their growth and healing. And it was so amazing to get to witness that in them and be a part of that. But I feel like what I really learned from that experience um, is kind of understanding more firsthand the transgenerational trauma and what gets passed down, and not only through the family, but systemically for people. And so, you know, if there's a young Black woman that I am seeing in therapy and, you know, she has a single mom who's working 3 jobs to provide for the family. And she is stepping up and taking care of her siblings because that's what's needed. And her emotional needs being met, like that's a luxury that the family just doesn't have time to do that. And so then she's college, and it feels like a huge conflict because who's going to take care of the siblings? But also, this is so huge for her and for her family. And her nervous system has not gotten the co regulation that it's needed. And so there's dysregulation. And so then she's in class, and maybe she missed an assignment, and the professor says something to her about it. And she has some kind of nervous system response. And the professor's just like, well, clearly you don't care about this class. When really, of course, her nervous system had that reaction, whatever that was. And, you know, and then that kind of brings up like conscious or unconscious racist beliefs or responses to this person whose nervous system makes perfect sense. And um, I got to witness that um, in a real way and in a different way than I would have had I not gotten to have this experience of being in this place and um, being connected with these students.
Yeah. Thank you so much for the work that you did. I'm sure that, I mean, there was such a huge ripple effect to you being um, a healer and a guide, and these first generation therapy clients. Um, what was it like for you to see the inner workings of their worlds? Um, I guess as it was in contrast to your world.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, in some ways, what I came to understand is how much attachment um, impacts us and ruptures in attachment, and seeing how these parts of them were impacted by that, while I was also learning about my own experience of rupture. um I don't know, it was kind of like I was discovering myself at the same time that I was learning about them and their inner world and their stories. um but the impact was just
Mm.
so much compassion. And you make perfect sense. You make so much sense. And it's not, it also, like, the idea of diagnosis as well. You know, sometimes students would come to us having been other places and would maybe have like a slew of diagnoses. And when you hear their story, it's like, well, do you have a personality disorder, or do you have a significant history of attachment rupture with no repair? And so, of course, you never felt safe inside. And of course, these parts of you have learned to respond to your environment in this way. And it would not feel safe for them. Knowing what they know, it would not be wise for them to not protect you in this way. So, like, okay, the DSM, and that's not to say diagnosis is never helpful. Sometimes being able to name a collection of experiences you're having on the inside feels very containing and feels very validating. Like, oh, yeah, it is that bad. That is how I feel or what I have. But um, it can also be really pathologizing when where somebody is a direct result of what they have experienced and how they have had to respond to and navigate and adapt to their environment and circumstances.
Thank you so much for that. because I feel so seen and heard just in you saying that. And I can't imagine what it did for these women that you were working with, because a lot of times we don't get that validation without someone that can relate to our experience. And so for you to be able to come from a different world and still meet them where they were, essentially put yourself in their world to understand, that is unheard of and so invaluable. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for saying that. And I feel like if you get the privilege of being in a space where you can listen deeply to somebody and they are trusting you enough to share what's truly inside, it's like when you get that close to somebody, you can't not care for them. You can't not see. Yeah, you can't not see just their goodness, and again that there's always a reason that makes sense.
Yeah,
Yeah.
always. And, like you said, they would come in with a slew of these diagnoses and maybe had never been seen or heard at all.
Hmm.
And that has got to be, it has to have a compounding effect of going through all of this trauma and these attachment injuries. And then when you ask for help, to be told, oh, well, it's just this. You're broken. There's something wrong with you. You have this. Instead of, let me listen to your story and really try and attune with your experiences to understand.
Yeah. Yeah. Everyone deserves that.
Everyone,
Yeah.
everyone.
Everyone does.
Thank you. Thank you for giving it to those individuals that needed it and found safety in you, because I'm telling you, those women that you helped, their children will now benefit from you, and you will be a lasting bridge and memory within those lineages.
Mm, thank you for saying that. There's a part of me like wanting to kind of minimize
Please don't.
my
It's
role.
huge. No, it's huge what you did. I'm telling you. I feel it, and I wasn't even a part of it.
Thank you.
So thank you.
That is, you know, my hope in this work in general, that the people who are doing this work, they are breaking cycles. They are
Mhm.
creating new possibilities for their lineage and for their descendants, um and also in how we interact with one another, when you do this work. And so it does have a ripple effect. And
Sure.
yeah, that's how we create change.
Mm.
Yeah, but I'm so grateful to them. I'm so grateful to them because I learned so much from them. And yeah, I'm grateful to them for trusting me to the extent that they did.
Sure. Yeah, because trust isn't easy when you have a history of trauma, and especially when you have to trust someone who doesn't look like you and you may not think can relate to you. So
Yeah.
I'm telling you, the work that you did and those bonds that you made, they are eternal.
Thank you. Thank you, Jalan.
Thank
Yeah.
you. All right. So now you're a therapist. You've done the training, you've done some work, you've helped some clients. Did anything feel like it was missing? And if so, was there a specific model that you found that kind of brought everything together for you?
Yeah. So, while the work that I was doing and that we were doing in the counseling center was really powerful, there were certain instances where I kind of found it just feels like I'm not reaching them. I'm not reaching them in the way that I want to, or we're feeling stuck, or it feels like we're hitting a wall. There's something not shifting or moving here. Um, and so around the time I had a couple of clients I was feeling that way with, and I read The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. And that really opened my eyes to the way trauma is stored in our brain and in our nervous system. And, you know, talk therapy and the relational piece can be so powerful and so healing. And also, because of the way trauma is stored in the body and in the brain, we need something more experiential and something more somatic to access it. And so, learning about that, first I trained in EMDR, and that was very powerful. But something was really calling me to IFS. And um, yeah, that totally changed the trajectory of my work and the way I work and the way I see therapy and the way I see the world and the way I see people. Um, and yeah, so it was 2021 that I started the circle. And then I started doing my own IFS consultation so that I could practice it ethically before I got into level 1, because I applied 50 times to get into level 1.
Sheesh.
I was like, I'm getting into this. I will apply as many times as it takes. But so that my own the consultation, which is working with my parts, basically the parts of me that come up in therapy and that come up in life, because all of the work you do with that just gives you more access to your self energy. So, yeah, it's really the work with my own system that has been the most transformative in how I show up as a therapist, and how I show up as a person.
Mm, that's beautiful. So you find IFS, right? What is different about this model? And let's say you have to explain it to somebody who's never heard of it. What is IFS? What felt so different? And what did it do for you?
Yeah. So IFS, or internal family systems therapy, is based on the idea that we are not a mono mind. So it's not just me, like I'm mad at you, or I feel sad, or I feel hurt. We actually have different parts of ourselves. So our internal experience is multiple. And we have parts of us that protect us from pain, and we have parts of us that are holding pain. And we can befriend and be in relationship with these parts so that they are next to us rather than blending with us and taking over us. And in that relationship with them, there is huge possibility for healing and transformation, which gives us so much more space inside and more freedom and more choices. Because when our parts that are protecting us from pain still sense that the pain is there, they are stuck in their roles of doing whatever they're doing, whether it's um, drinking or yelling or getting everything perfect or whatever it could be. When that pain is freed up and healed, they don't have to do that in the same way anymore. And so it was the first, I want to say, like, I've had amazing and beautiful therapy experiences with therapists who are not IFS therapists. Um, and this has been the first process that has made me feel really different on the inside, to where I go into a situation that I used to like feel very reactive about, and I don't anymore. So it is powerful. And it is also gentle. It's also very gentle. It's moving at the pace of your system. And it's so respectful and egalitarian. It's um, as a therapist, I'm the guide and you are the expert of your system. And so I don't have an agenda about where we're going to go. I have a sense of how to guide the process, but you and your parts are the expert. So I'm going to just meet you where you are and we'll just follow that trail. But so we're just really co-creating the experience. And it's not me like telling you what you have to do, which is such a relief.
That's, yeah, I mean, that sounds. I love IFS and I'm so proficient in it. And just listening to you, I'm like, wow, that sounds so nice.
It does sound nice. Yeah.
Because it's true. Like, you're the expert of your system. I'm the expert of my system. So if you don't rely on me, then how can we ever progress?
Yeah. And it's so client centered in terms of, as an IFS therapist, one of my biggest responsibilities is knowing my own system and my own parts. And so I know that if something comes up for me in session, it is my part and
Mm,
it is my responsibility to either do my own work with that part or take that part to consultation so that I can show up for you with an open heart and a self-led way. And it's not like I got triggered and so I'm telling you you're resistant, or I'm telling you you should be doing that differently because I'm feeling uncomfortable. It's like very clear that's my part, because when I get space from that, I can just be with wherever your system is. So, because I've had experiences with therapists in the past where, um, and I mean, our parts are going to get triggered as therapists, but yeah, their parts got triggered, and there was a rupture, and it wasn't a repair. There wasn't a repair,
mm,
and as a client, that's really harmful.
yeah.
Yeah,
Thank you for naming that and for going into such detail with the expansiveness of what IFS can be, and also naming that, like, our triggers are our responsibility. You know, we have to be able to do our own work before we can be in relation with others, because if not, we're always going to be triggered and we're always going to be responding to something that we may then push onto that person,
yeah,
and not take responsibility for the work that we need to do in order to have um safe relationships.
yeah, absolutely. And as therapists, we have a higher level of responsibility with that because yeah, we're holding the frame and we're creating the safety.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Sure. So you blend IFS with so many other things: energy healing, astrology, ancestral work, somatic wisdom. And not it's not that you just offer these things, you weave them all. So I want to ask you, what's it like to blend IFS with all these other threads, and how do you know which door to open when you're working with someone?
Oh, I love it. It's so great. It's so creative. Um, I will say, IFS is my desert island modality. Like if I am on a desert island, I can only pick one. It's IFS. It feels so complete. You can have just a really complete healing experience with that process. But there are so many things that I'm interested in and that have supported me and my sense of wholeness. And so I was kind of doing them in this parallel process alongside of the therapy, but had been dreaming about for a really long time, like what if I could bring these together? That would be such a holistic, integrative experience. And, you know, IFS and Reiki and astrology in particular go together so well. And in some ways, they're kind of saying similar things, but just using different language, because with IFS, we are going inside, we're taking a U turn, we are connecting with our parts, um, and working with ourselves on this kind of micro level to bring healing. Astrology is zooming out to the macro level and looking at the bigger picture. And, you know, you can think of planets as like parts of you. You know, each planet has a certain archetypal energy associated with it, and all the signs do as well. And so if you look at a natal chart, it can be like an externalization of your parts. And so you're kind of seeing a bigger picture, how these parts or planets are relating to one another. And it's like a mirror. It's like, what does that bring up for you? You know, if I'm naming these are the themes of what I'm seeing in your chart, what is your experience of that? What does that bring up for you? So it's really a lens to bring your own internal experience more into your consciousness so that you can work with it in a conscious way. And then Reiki, which is Reiki means universal life force energy. Um, and I think about that and potentially how that connects to self energy, and how self energy, you know, Richard Schwartz talks about it being both a particle and a wave. And like we're the particle and we exist in this bigger wave of self energy. And so if Reiki is universal life force energy, we might be tapping into that larger sense of self energy, you know, when we bring in something like Reiki. And it's just like a larger resource, a larger support to kind of hold you as you're doing your inner work. And you know what the studies show Reiki does is it supports your body's own natural healing process. And so yeah, it is just supportive of that process. It reduces your stress response, and so that puts you more into the ventral vagal state in polyvagal. Like that's where you're open to being social and connecting and rest and digest. And that's the nervous system state where your body can heal. You know, your body can heal cuts more quickly, and you can resolve sickness more quickly. Um, and that's the state where we have the most access to self energy. So it just supports having access to your own self energy too. And so they all kind of work together. We have working with the parts, we have the bigger picture and looking at, you know, patterns and possibilities for growth and evolution. And then that kind of larger universal life force or self energy that can kind of hold you and support your access to your own healing resources.
Thank you for sharing that. It was very informative, and I wanted to ask you more about these intuitive and energetic layers of your work because I think when you look at healing overall, it's not just about cognition and behavior; it's about energy and intuition and soul as well. Um, and the way you bridge these worlds, it's sacred, and you don't just dabble; you go deep. So, I wanted to ask you, like, where did that part of you first come from, and this path of merging all these things begin? Was it something that you always felt, or was it, I guess, progressive as you were learning as a clinician?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, on one level, I always felt it. I was always
Mhm.
really curious about these things. Um, and that was part of my imagination and my being really intuitive as a kid. And also like I remember being a kid and reading the funny papers, like the comic section of the paper, and the horoscopes would be next to the funny pages, which shows you kind of like where we put that in our in our culture. This is where all the silly stuff goes. Um, but I was like, oh, I don't know. I was so intrigued by it, but I sort of didn't feel permission to really say in a true way, I am interested in this, because it felt silly. Um,
Mm.
and of course, there are cultural burdens around that, around what we take seriously. Um, you know, what like focusing on kind of what's really academic and what is heavily researched. And of course, those things are important. Of course, those things are important. And there is this way in which these other ways of knowing or doing things that are feminine, intuitive, um, that derive from indigenous wisdom, have been kind of more exiled in our Western materialist, intellectual, patriarchal culture. And so those cultural dynamics kind of say, this is silly nonsense. And you're going to look silly if you say that you are seriously into that. So, I was always kind of tapped in, but didn't feel permission or allowed until later in life. And it was like, actually, I did my EMDR training at Omega Institute. I don't know if you've ever been there, but it feels like a very magical place. And just being there kind of awakened something in me. And just their bookstore has so many books about all of these things. And I was like, oh, people seriously read this stuff? Like people are like really doing this. And if they are, then maybe I can, it kind of gave me permission. And then in my private practice office, when I still had a physical office, one of my colleagues was a Reiki master and an astrologer. And she offered Reiki training to the clinicians and the professionals working in our space. And so I took her up on that, and I didn't tell anybody I was doing it because I thought they would think I was crazy. But it was a powerful experience. And then she also did my first natal chart reading, and it was all spot on. And it just lit me up. It just felt like, oh my gosh, this feels so exciting and so full of wonder. And it's like awakening my imagination, and it's kind of bringing in these other possibilities. And so it just felt like this part of myself that had been dormant was activated and was allowed to be. And it made me feel more myself to get to include those things. And so it was really in having those experiences for myself and how powerful they were for me that I was kind of like, this is a part of healing, and this is really powerful. And it would be really impactful to bring all this together. And like working with astrology in particular, looking at my natal chart, it kind of gave me a new way to relate to parts of myself that I wasn't even necessarily aware of, because you're working with archetypes, which are universal patterns, are symbols. And so archetypes can have many expressions. So for an example, Pisces, one of the signs is Pisces, and I have a Pisces stellium, which means I have 3 planets in Pisces. So I have a lot of Pisces energy, and Pisces is like the mystic. It's compassion, it's universal consciousness, it is, wanting to be healing, wanting to be connected, like knowing that we're all connected, having that knowing, and very imaginative, very creative, all of these things that feel like me. But you could call it the shadow side, or you could call it the burdened versus unburdened expression, which is what Sarah Temmel, who does No Bad Charts and is an IFS and astrology person, that's what she calls it, like the burdened versus unburdened expression. The burdened expression of Pisces is like escapism. Like you feel everything so much that you want to escape. And that could be into substances, that could be spending way too much time on your phone, or way too much time watching Netflix, or like ghosting in relationships. burden expressions of Pisces is like feeling like a victim. Like Pisces is not a very assertive sign. Pisces is like, I love everyone. I feel so much compassion for you. And so if you hurt me, it's hard for me to like assert myself or set a boundary. I would much rather just kind of merge. So when you struggle with setting boundaries, then you might feel like a victim, or feel attacked. Or if you can't assert yourself directly, there could be manipulation that you don't know that you're doing, but to try to get your need met if you can only assert in like a passive way. So learning about the archetype of Pisces, it's externalized, it's out here. So I'm looking at it and I'm unblended from it. I'm curious about it. I'm like, oh, so these are things about Pisces. Do I have any of that? Do I have any parts that do that? Versus if you were sitting with somebody and they're like, you're being manipulative or you're making yourself a victim or something like that, which like, if somebody said that to me, I could be really defensive. I could be like, go screw yourself. Like, what are you what are you talking about? Um, so yeah, it allowed me to just engage with the potential of finding parts of myself that maybe other protective parts wouldn't want me to see, wouldn't want me to know because they want me to be good. So yeah, I experienced this like big unblending in doing that.
That was so much and so good, and not in a bad way. No,
It was so much.
I no, but it was, and this is what this conversation was about, because we're tackling something that is so taboo and that people feel shame about, and most people have no idea what it is,
Yeah.
including myself. And so I feel like we're getting into the meat and potatoes of why we showed up here today. And
Yeah.
let's start with astrology. And you touched on it some, but like the basics, because I know I've always been told it's bad or demonic, but I
Yeah.
don't know anything about it, if I'm being honest. So for me and others who know astrology as, a sign, or what's your sign, like the pickup line that everybody uses. um, how would you explain astrology, like a birth chart, what it actually is and how it can offer insight?
Yeah. Um, yeah. And just wanting to acknowledge anyone's belief system that brings up fear around this, um, you know, permission to meet your parts where they are. And astrology astrology can meet you where you are if you're someone who is curious about it. It doesn't have to change your belief system. It doesn't have to change anything about how you view or feel about the world. It's really a symbolic language that helps you to look at patterns and themes in your life. Um, and I can explain more how we do that. But like when you think about what's your sign, what's your sun, that's so that what people are talking about when they say that is your sun sign. So that's the sign the sun was in when you were born. And that's if you're reading the horoscopes next to the funny papers and you're like, my horoscope says I will meet a mysterious stranger and I should stay away from casinos today. And you're like, but I am on a writer's retreat in a cabin in the woods, 500 miles from civilization. That seems really unlikely. Like, this is bullshit, you know? um, those are just based on your sun sign and they're very vague. And it's so much more complex than that. So when you look at your natal chart, you are looking at the placement of where each of the planets were at the moment of your birth. And this is where there's a quote from Carl Jung, and he says, whatever is born or done in a particular moment of time has the quality of that moment in time. And, that could be true of creating art, but that's what the natal chart is. It's like, this is a snapshot of this moment in time, and these are the qualities of this moment in time. And that's determined by the archetypal energies of the planets and the signs that they're in and the configuration that they have, which is essentially different for every person. And now there are some, like you could have two babies born a few minutes apart and they might have the same birth chart, but then that's where nature and nurture and environment and how you're raised and free will and all that comes in. And because these are universal energies, they can be expressed in many, many ways. But it still contains something that can be true and meaningful for you. And so another way to think about it is if we are all connected, if we all have self energy, and maybe nature has its own self energy. So there's this thread of this life force energy or self energy that connects all of us. Then we could kind of be a microcosm of this macrocosm, like a fractal of the whole. And so if you look at what's happening with the archetypal energies of the planets, it's not that the planets are making us do something. They are a mirror in which we could see something reflected on the outside about what is the quality of what I'm experiencing on the inside. So, yeah, it's like the Hermetic principle, as above, so below, as within, so without. So you can use it almost like a projective measure in that way of like, these are the themes and they're playing out in the collective, but also I'm experiencing them personally. So how am I experiencing that? How is that showing up for me? And if I'm reflecting on that, then how can I be with that? How can I work with that? What parts of me is that landing on? And now I can be with those parts. I can be in a healing process with those parts or whatever. But so it is like an avenue to bring consciousness to what your internal world is.
That was a great explanation. And I don't think you can ignore things that are real and true. Like, for instance, when there's a full moon, people act differently.
Yeah.
Or something that I mentioned to you was I was looking into the Prague astronomical clock, which is this giant, intricate machine built in the 1400s. And I realized that it tracks solar time, lunar time, sidereal time, and zodiac time. And like someone built this massive clock in the middle of this city that's literally based on astrology, and it's not for decoration. And, that kind of made me wonder if the resistance to astrology is more about modern disconnection than actual facts. And so bringing it all back together, when people say astrology isn't real, how do you hold that, especially knowing that there are ancient tools like this that prove that humanity took this seriously for centuries?
Yeah. I love that question. Well, yeah. Oh gosh, there's so many places I could start with this. Um, lots of things wanting to come forward. Yeah, okay, so if astrology isn't real, I mean, first of all, when you say real, it's like, what does that mean? Does it mean there are 15,000 peer-reviewed articles published in journals about the efficacy of using astrology? Like there aren't. There is evidence. There is definitely evidence that there is something meaningful there. Um, there's a book called Cosmos and Psyche by a man named Richard Tarnas, and he's Harvard educated. He's a philosopher and historian. And the book is about the correlation between certain archetypal patterns that show up in these celestial bodies and correlate how they correlate with similar types of historical events throughout time and throughout the ages. And it's so interesting. And he talks about um, he's a historian, and he wrote this history of Western civilization for his maybe first book. And he thought it was silly and kind of dismissed it immediately. But he said he had some intellectual peers who he really respected, who were into it. And then he started looking into it and found that, people like Jung, Carl Jung, and Aristotle, and Yeats, and all of these intellectual luminaries in history used astrology. Like Carl Jung used astrology with his patients, and he wrote letters about it to Freud, and he wanted it to be researched because he found the correlations to be so powerful. Um, and then he started looking into people's charts that were available and started seeing correlations in their biographies with these certain transits or events. And so looking into that became very compelling for him. And so then he put together this book that's like the accumulation of 30 years of research about all of the patterns that correlate with these particular planetary alignments. And so it's like looking at patterns. But I think another thing, the question that I kind of think about rather than is it real is it helpful?
Mm.
And um, that's why, like, this is not a therapy modality. This is not a substitute for therapy, but it is complementary. It can be complementary to therapy because it's a tool that provides these openings for self-reflection. Um, just like journal prompts, just like if you're looking at the Rorschach, it's like, what do you see in that? It tells you something about what's happening inside of you. So it is a tool for reflection that can really help bring things into your conscious awareness. Um, and and again, my experience is it is like an externalization of your parts. And so when you look at it in that way, there is an unblending, and you feel seen in a different way. You feel permission to have aspects of yourself that maybe you didn't feel like you should have. Like I did somebody's chart who, she is very humanitarian in nature, and she felt really bad about herself because she likes nice things.
Mhm.
I feel like this is like a flaw. This is, um, I don't know. This is like a vice or a flaw or something that kind of bothers me. But she's a Taurus moon, and Taurus, among other things, Taurus is the sign of like luxury and pleasure. It is the material. It's like the first earth sign. So it's things coming into form. And moon is your emotions and your inner world and what feels good to you, what feels nurturing to you. So if you have a Taurus moon, yes, you like cashmere sweaters, and you you like you like holding nice things that feel good to you. Taurus is the sign of abundance. Um, and it just brought her a lot of relief. She's like, oh, that is a part of me. I'm not
Mhm.
bad for having that. Like, that's actually a part of how I'm wired. And so that's an unblending. And then there's acceptance and self compassion. So you have more access to self energy now. And so that's, a way that it can support the therapeutic process. If you're seeing yourself in a different way, you have more access to your curiosity and your self compassion. We have more access to your self energy, and we can work with your parts, in a clearer way. So,
Um, I think that the way you just allowed for her to unblend from that part and to unburden what she was feeling, perfectly blended IFS with astrology, because the astrology shows you how you're wired, and IFS tells you, okay, that your wiring isn't bad.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they go together so well.
hmm
Yeah.
And I think it's, what you don't understand, you fear. So if no one has understood this concept or astrology as a whole, um, you fear it, you dismiss it, and you say it's, nonsense, or you put it next to the funnies in the newspaper because
Yeah.
it's dismissed.
Yeah.
Um, but again, like there's this clock that people have been using for centuries, and it tracks all the stuff like solar time and lunar phases and zodiac alignments. And like I said, it's been since the 1400s, which, it makes it hard to say that astrology isn't real when there's literally this clock that's built around learning all this. And another thing is the ancient systems they use had 13 months and 28 days, which lines up perfectly with the moon, and feels more natural. And it started to make me wonder, like, are we calculating time accurately, or could we be like on a wrong timeline if there's evidence that this is real and it can't be dismissed?
Yeah. It's such a cool question.
I don't know.
Yeah, but yeah, so being on the lunar calendar, a 28-day month, we would have 13 months. But we are on a solar calendar. So it's based on the trajectory of the sun. And if you think about that symbolically, I mean, we could really get into this, but so the solar principle is masculine. It's the masculine principle. In astrology, it's the ego and it's the masculine and your personality, and it's outward focused. It's linear. It's directive. The sun has this like year-long cycle where the moon is feminine, and she goes through different phases throughout her 28-day cycle. She's changing. She's, um, flowing. And yeah, what does it feel like if we follow the solar cycle versus the lunar cycle? And there's a lot of talk about, what it's like as a woman to be expected to kind of adhere to masculine rhythms and norms where you just keep going. There's not like the same fluctuation to your energy versus if you were allowed to kind of flow with the moon. But yeah, like I think the current calendar we use, the Gregorian calendar that was implemented sometime in the 1500s. So that's after the clock was created. And I was reading about that. And apparently there was some movement to maybe shift back to a 13-month calendar in the early 1900s. And um, it was shot down basically because it would be disruptive to like commerce and um, like business stuff, basically. So that makes sense. But yeah, I think whatever calendar we're on, just we the way we have been asked to live does kind of disconnect us from just the rhythms in general, and like when you think about the new year being January 1, that's the new year. And you're supposed to be like, I'm going to go to the gym and do like 2 hours of high intensity training because it's new year, new me. I'm going to like have all this energy and get stuff done and knock out my goals. That's not really the energy of January 1. We just had the solstice. It's the darkest day of the year. There's the least amount of energy in the sky. The trees are barren. We are nature. Our bodies feel that. Our bodies feel and are where everything else is in nature. And other cultures know this, like the Chinese Lunar New Year is in February. And that's kind of around a similar time to like the Celtic Imbolc, which is kind of the halfway point between the winter solstice and the spring equinox. So, and it's kind of like spring is starting to come. And then astrologically, the new year is towards the end of March with Aries season. That's the beginning of the astrological year. And that's the energy of spring, is like, it's this rising energy. It's like the plants are bursting out of the ground. They have energy to rise and get things done. It's the energy of creation, of being creative, you know? And so that might be a better time to start a new gym routine. Like, not that you shouldn't, but you just might, your body just might feel more supported doing that, when in January we're still nesting and storing and dreaming and in the darkness, you know. But yeah, I don't know if that answered your question.
No, it did for sure. And I mean, as long as we're talking about it, I feel like we're doing something, because um, bringing insight to things that have been dismissed or that are misunderstood, I feel is part of healing, because the more resources you have, the more you can do,
Yeah.
and I feel like a lot of the generations that came before us, they were severely under resourced. They didn't have a lot of tools, and a lot of things were, you know, written off because they were misunderstood. So
Yeah.
education is so important.
Yeah. And the tools they did have, like, were dismissed or minimized because they weren't, I don't know, the standard or something like that.
Correct.
Yeah.
Sure. So a little bit more about astrology. There's this idea that a chart shows kind of like a soul blueprint.
Hmm.
And I wanted to ask, what does that mean? Like, how can the time and the place that we're born say something about um, our path or patterns?
Yeah. So the time and place we're born, that dictates what our natal chart is. And if you look at the natal chart, um, one way of thinking about it, okay, so we have these planets in different signs, and it also shows kind of what parts of your life you might experience these energies in, because we all have all 12 signs and all of the planets in our, somewhere in our charts. We all have all of it. We all have everything inside, and it might show up in different ways in different places in your life. So, it could show up with yourself, with your body. It could show up in your relationships. It can show up with your work, your career, your family, your home life. These are all different parts of life where the planets could be, where the signs can be. And one way of thinking about it, and you can think of this as like a metaphor, is if we are here on Earth, then imagine it's like a school, where we're here to learn lessons. Then your natal chart is like your curriculum, and so it can show maybe the ways we're here to grow, the ways we're here to evolve, and it, depending on the relationship between the planets, the angles between the planets, it shows these are blessings and gifts, and these are areas of ease, versus these are areas of challenge, which means these are the biggest opportunities for growth. Like, you can if you're working with it consciously, yeah, you can integrate all of this, um, and these more challenging aspects are the biggest areas of growth. And so holding that, if you're going through a challenging time, or if you're in a challenging transit, it's like, what is the opportunity for me here? How am I growing through this? And I want to just name, like, that's something I want to be careful about or bring some nuance to, because that can feel, it's like, if you're in a place where you're resourced enough to be reflecting, that might be a really useful way to look at this. If you're in a place where you're not resourced, or where you're actively being harmed or persecuted, being like, how is this an opportunity for growth for you? That can really, that's very invalidating and not helpful. So I just want to name that. It's like if you're in a place where reflecting in this way serves you, yeah, that's something you can consider if that resonates with you. And also, if somebody is being harmed or raped or trafficked or attacked or going through um, a famine or something like that, no, we just need to support you. Like, we just need you
Yeah.
to be safe, you know? So I just want to say that.
Mm. Yeah. Thank you for that, because I know a lot of people will say, well, you know, there's a war going on. How am I supposed to reflect on this? Like, no, you need safety. And then once you are in a safe space, maybe we can look at some other things. So I'm glad you brought
Yeah.
that up.
Yeah. Like the meaning, you can make meaning of your story. And that's after you are safe and you've processed it and like you're in a place to do that. Yeah.
Sure. All right. Another one that I want to talk about is astrophotography. Um, this is new for a lot of people and new for me too. What even is astrophotography, and can location really affect how we feel or even thrive?
Yeah. So it's new for me too. I think it's so interesting. I don't know that much about it. But what I will say, what I know about it is essentially you can pull up you can pull up your astrocartography chart, and it's bringing astrology to geographic place. So you can look at your chart and see y- like the line of your sun intersects with these places, or the line of your Pluto. If you went anywhere along this line, you'd be on your Pluto line. And the idea being like you would have more plutonic experiences there. Um, and there are some astrologers that I follow who specialize in this and who swear by it. Um, there's one who shared she and her husband moved to his Jupiter line, and Jupiter is the great benefic of the planets. It is like blessings, abundance, expansion, faith, broadening your horizons. Um, it can also just expand things. So for better or for worse, but they moved to his Jupiter line and all of these opportunities opened up that they never would have expected. So that's an anecdotal piece of information. But I have looked at my chart. Um, there aren't many places that are convenient to me for me to like go and see how they feel. Apparently, my sun line and the most like the place for me to be based on my astrocartography chart is Baja, and I have not been to Baja. And so, like, maybe I will book a trip on my work card for research purposes and like go to Baja and see how that feels. And so if I do that, I'll let you know how it goes. But that's that's the place for me to be, apparently, according to my astrocartography chart.
Mm. I've heard a lot of people say that in certain areas or certain places they feel more alive, more connected.
Yeah.
Um, and it was just, something I remember when I first heard it, I was like, like I thought about it. And then, when having this opportunity to do this with you, I was like, well, why don't we just bring it all in here?
Yeah. No, I'm glad you did. I have heard that too. I mean, apparently that is an experience people have on their sun line. So it's like, if the sun is your sense of vitality and your personality. It's like I've heard it described as this feeling of just being so at home and being so yourself and just feeling
Mm.
really like a homecoming being there.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Yeah. I'm glad we got to talk about that a little bit. But now I
Yeah.
want to move into something more and something else that you specialize in. So let's talk energy healing.
Yeah.
And I think for some people, energy work can sound vague or mystical. How would you explain what energy and energetic attunement is, especially to someone who's never experienced it or thinks it's practicing magic?
Yeah. That's a great question. So, I mean, you know, in addition to our physical and emotional selves, we also have an energetic component to our being. And, you know, our hearts and brains emit electromagnetic fields, frequencies that can be measured by scientific instruments. So we do emit a field. And you know, you may have had the experience of like being in a room and you don't hear somebody come in, but you just sort of feel a sense of them behind you. You know, like that's kind of feeling the energy. Or you come into a room and you don't know what just happened, but you just are like, something just happened in here. I don't I don't know. Maybe I should turn around and, you know, come back later. Or you have an interaction with somebody and the conversation is perfectly pleasant, but afterwards you just feel like, oh, I don't know. Like I feel like I need to take a shower or something. I don't like I just the vibes are off. So, you know, those are all experiences of relating in an energetic way. Um, and you know, we have self energy and our parts have self energy. So when we're doing IFS work, we are working from that place in ourself that can really be with all our parts. And it's a presence. It's not, it's a consciousness or a presence. It's not a concrete part. So, you know, it kind of, and being in that place affects our parts, like they soften in response to that energy. So those are some examples, but, the, the type that I use is Reiki. And again, it means universal life force energy. And one way of thinking about it is kind of getting acupuncture without needles. Um, Acupuncture also works with energy, and that's something that, you know, insurance companies will reimburse for. But
Mm.
um, yeah, it bringing it in seems to support the body's natural healing response, support the body into entering a state where it is less stressed, and that allows healing to flow more easily. Um, and Reiki is often hands on. You can also send it from a distance, kind of as like a guided meditation. Um, and that is typically the way that I do it. And yeah, it can be brought in to work with parts. It can be brought in to kind of increase your access to your own self energy so that you can befriend a part with more ease. Um, there's also a type of session that I do where it's kind of an energetic clearing, and you can do it on any issue you want, and you find it in your body similarly to how you find a part in or around your body. And my experience of that is that it's similar to like a legacy unburdening in IFS, where if you do a legacy unburden, the part is holding legacy energy, so energy passed down through the family that doesn't belong to the part. It's not from the individual experience of the part. And so when they are able to release the legacy energy that doesn't really belong to them, then it's easier to work with the personal burdens. And so my experience of the Reiki is that it can kind of be like that. It can kind of release like an energetic layer that isn't yours, that you don't have to carry anymore. So then it's just easier to work with what is. You have more access to it.
I like that. Easier to work with what is.
Hmm.
And that's where you want to be.
Yeah,
You want
that's
to
where you
get
gotta
rid
be.
of all the baggage and luggage that you're carrying that doesn't belong to you.
Right. Exactly.
And I was thinking about something that you said about energy, because I know that animals are very in tune with sensing energy and energetic fields. Like, for instance, if you get in the water, a shark can sense that your energy is in there from the electromagnetic, I guess, energy that your heart is
Yeah.
releasing.
Yeah.
And so, you can't dismiss that. You can't.
Yeah.
You can't say that, oh, well, that just belongs to aquatic world or what have you. It's a thing, and I
Right.
think when we actually consider it to be a reality, it can give us more tools.
That's right. Yeah, it's just like an expanding of your awareness and um, ways of perceiving. And we are used to perceiving and experiencing from kind of the left brain, logical thinking parts of us. And those are incredibly valuable parts of us. We have to have them. We couldn't survive without them. And they're this right brain, experiential, intuitive, sensing way of being, that's also a part of us. And we just haven't been taught to use that or taught to engage with that. And little kids naturally know how to do it. They are doing it. Little kids are really tuned
Hmm.
in. And then yeah, we learn to look to the world around us to tell us what we should do. Or and in school, it's really important to memorize facts and to think in certain ways so we can get the grades we need to get on the tests and projects. And so we learn this very linear way of thinking because that's kind of what we're expected to do in our day-to-day lives. And so these other ways of sensing and experiencing just get underdeveloped or kind of forgotten about or even actively suppressed. But we innately do have that.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm so glad we're talking about this, and I guess kind of taking the veil off of what people have um looked at it for so long as something just wrong or bad, or if, like you mentioned, if acupuncture is something that insurance companies will cover for, or will cover or reimburse for, and the type of energy healing that you're doing is essentially acupuncture without needles, why is one looked at as so wrong and the other as, oh, this is okay?
Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah. Yeah. Well, people want to be able to touch. They want to be able to put their fingers on it, and I don't know. Maybe you can like touch the needles, and the needles are touching your body, and that makes sense.
Yeah.
Um, but the Mayo Clinic has Reiki in their complementary health services.
Oh,
Hopkins has Reiki in their complementary health services. So it is there is more research coming out about Reiki. Um, and you can use Reiki just in really practical ways to support your physical health. And then you can use it in more intuitive ways, like through a guided meditation or a Reiki journey, which is where you're kind of given some visualizations to help you shift into a more relaxed state of consciousness so that you can receive information from your intuition, and yeah, like when our thinking parts give us space, we do have more access to our intuition. So it makes sense. But so you can engage with it at the level that you feel comfortable. Like, um, my dad will text me and be like, "Can you send me Reiki for my knee?" And yeah, I can. So like that feels comfortable for him, and he's had the experience of that being helpful. So yeah, so you can do that, or you can just, it can meet you where you are. You can meet it where you are.
I like that. I like that a lot because that's important. If you have to meet people where they are,
Yeah.
because if you don't, you won't have that connection that is needed for healing.
Yeah. None of this ever, it's always about meeting you where you are and your belief system. You don't have to buy into anything I'm saying. This is available if it resonates. And if it doesn't have to. We're just
Mm,
gonna see who you are as a person and what is supportive to you. These are just
mm,
tools and possibilities if they resonate.
sure. So you've mentioned that you help people remember the blueprint of their wholeness. What does that mean in practice? And is that something you sense or something that they uncover?
Yeah, I think it's both. It
Mm,
For me, It's just a knowing that I have that wholeness is your natural state of being. Um, so that is just what I'm holding for you, for anyone that I'm working with. Like, yeah, we're going to help you return to your wholeness by welcoming back parts of yourself you may not be in relationship with. And in doing the work, people start to discover that, as they connect with their parts, as they see this part that they thought they hated is actually really a deeply caring part and is willing to do anything for them, even if it means they get disliked. Um, just this way of getting to know the aspects of yourself as being inherently helpful and well intentioned, even if they're inadvertently causing harm. Um, and also like when the parts start to see you, I having that experience of like connecting with a part, inviting them to turn towards you. And sometimes you can kind of see yourself through the part's eyes and see who you really are. And that is really powerful. Like when
Mm.
you connect with that and know that and see yourself through your part's eyes and just the love that is really the love and wholeness that is really at your core, that when your parts can feel that from you, they will have a healing experience. Um, yeah, that just changes your sense of yourself. And everything else is like, okay, we'll just, we'll find what still is in the way of that. That might not be done at the end of this lifetime, but that's kind of the process I'm in. But that knowing that that's what's at your core, that changes how you feel about yourself.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah.
So let's say someone's listening and they decide that they want to work with you. Um, what can they expect, and what is it you want them to know most?
Yeah. So they can expect that I will be curious about what's bringing them in and want to know kind of what feels wrong, and also if they have a vision for what they're hoping for, what they'd like to move into, if this therapy works for them, what does that look like for them? And sometimes people don't know that, and that's okay. But we're going to meet you right where you are, and we are going to start with what shows up first, and we are going to move at the pace of your system, and we are going to listen to hesitations and concerns, and um, and these other modalities are available if that's something you're interested in. If you'd like to kind of do some expanding of your self awareness in that way, we can bring in astrology, we can bring in Reiki, and it's really a co creating process and a creative process that is kind of guided by what you're interested in, what you're comfortable with. But we're just going to flow with your system, and that will take us exactly where we need to go in exactly the time that it needs to happen. And yeah,
That was great and very inviting. Um, so I hope anyone who was listening that may have been hesitant with these modalities or tools will reach out
I would love that.
for sure. All right, last question for you, Liz.
Okay.
If you could use your platform to educate anyone who might be struggling with their mental or emotional health and might be uncertain of how or where to start, what would you say?
Yeah. Well, first of all, if you are listening and you are struggling, I am just sending you a lot of care right now. Um, and, depending on what you're struggling with, like if you're struggling with systemic issues or something really big. I mean, there's so many intense things happening right now. I just hope that you have access to some kind of community support, and I hope that you have your basic needs met. That's kind of the most important thing before anything else. But beyond that, if you're struggling, I want to offer, if you're able to notice, like, what is the nature of your struggle? Is there something you're frustrated about within yourself? Or if you're feeling more down or if you're feeling more activated, whatever you're noticing, just holding the possibility that that particular way of struggling is a part that is intending to be helpful to you, and that the way it's showing up, it has learned to do for very good reasons. And in being able to do that, it has protected you and kept you safe in some way in the past. And it makes sense that it is feeling um, hard or frustrating now, but I just want to acknowledge that. And if there's space for you to acknowledge that, if that feels like genuine to you, if you have space for that, just inviting that. But if not, I'm just holding that for you, that whatever you're struggling with, there is something there to understand that makes sense, that's trying to help you. And I would just say, like, what is the next right step for you? You don't have to have it all figured out or have your whole plan figured out, but is it, finding another episode of Jalan's podcast that resonates with you and then listening to that one next? Or maybe one of his guests that really resonates with you has a book, and you could check out that book and see how that feels, to kind of go a little deeper. Or maybe you're ready to start looking into therapy and you want to just do a Psychology Today search. Do a search on psychologytoday.com with your insurance, looking at therapists in your area that take your insurance. So just notice kind of like what the one next step for you, where you are, is, and try that, and then see how that feels, and then see what the next step you want to take might be. And yeah, again, just sending you. And if you are finding a therapist, I want to say my hope for you is that you are connecting with somebody who sees you and your wholeness, and who is able to meet you where you are with an understanding that where you are makes sense. Rather than, diagnosis may be part of the process, but rather than making a diagnosis and just giving a kind of preset treatment to the diagnosis. Like, I want you to have the experience of being seen as a person in your wholeness for who you are, and being in a relationship where that is held and you can work together in that process and feel like an equal. That's my hope for you.
Hmm. Thank you for that. That was so beautiful, so warm and welcoming. I think anyone who heard that or who is listening will benefit so much from everything you've said today, all of your modalities and tools that you've shared, your stories, and just collectively the entire episode. I feel like it was amazing. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for creating this space and creating this way of helping me be really comfortable so I could share all of this, and just your presence and your mission. And it's really an honor to be a part of this with you, Jalan.
Mm.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much for that. I appreciate that. If people want to find you online or on social media, where can they find you?
Yeah, you can find me online at my website, heartsighthealing.com. And you can find me on Instagram at HeartSight Healing. Those are the two main places. If you come to my website, you can sign up for my newsletter. And I also have a free guided meditation you're welcome to sign up for. Um, yeah, that's where I am.
All right, perfect. Well, Elizabeth, again, thank you so much for this. Thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for who you are. Thank you for what you do. And thank you for how you do it.
Thank you. Same.